so lonely, broken angel. I'm so lonely.
Seymour Hersh, welcome to Hunt. Hello. You have always said that key to your journalism was this idea you had of being the outsider. Where did that mindset come from?
I can't psychoanalyze myself. I don't understand it. But I was an outsider. I grew up my parents were immigrants. Neither one graduated from high school. The only learning I did, the real pressure I had, was when I was 13, I was getting the Book of the Month Club, which is a nonfiction every month, and reading sometimes about the perils of communism, but also reading about the Habsburg monarchy and the Chinese history. So I was always reading on myself. As a journalist, I've learned two things that I think is important. One, you have to read before you write. Mm-hmm. And then once you get the story, you really got to get the hell out of the way of the story and just know enough to tell it. Let the words tell it. There's no such thing as a fantastic story. There's a story that becomes fantastic in the telling. So those are two things I kept in mind always.
And I'm very aware that you came of age, you entered the world of work and entered journalism in the 1960s, a time of deeply polarized opinion, a time when many young Americans, particularly at university and right after it, were of an anti-war persuasion. Was that you?
No, I came in 1960. I went to University of Chicago. I was an okay student. I went to law school. I hated law school. I dropped out, sold beer, what kids do. Got a job as a police reporter, as a crime reporter for an agency called the City News Bureau of Chicago, sort of a famous place, front page, that play stems from there. And I learned there that the city was yours as long as you didn't. You could be nice. You could be tough on cops as long as you did not interfere between the cops and the mafia, because the Chicago mafia ran the city, and as long as you respected that. So I saw up close tyranny in a way.
Let's remember that we're recording this interview at the very time of the 50th anniversary of one of the darkest incidents in the history of the U.S. military and U.S. warfighting. That is the massacre of more than 500 civilians in My Lai. That was in March of 1968. We might never know the extent of what happened, the truth of what happened, if it hadn't been for your reporting. How did you dig deep into that story? What brought it to you?
Well, I ended up working for the Associated Press in Chicago, and then I ended up in Washington for them, covering the Pentagon. And I like military people, and I like people in the intelligence community, as critical as I could be, because there's a lot of very good ones. And at that time, I was very aggressive and energetic, and I wouldn't just take briefings. I ran around and talked to people like I think one should. I don't want a briefing. I want to know for myself what's going on. And so I began to get into the cynicism of the officer corps about the war. And I began to meet officers, and America's, like your countries, we're a very open society. And before long, they're telling me it's a bloodbath. And so I knew there was trouble. And so when I got a tip, somebody called up one day and said to me, Hersh, maybe you'll chase it. There's a terrible story. And I just tried to run it down. It took a little while. I eventually learned the name Calley from an officer.
That's important, because this gentleman, William Calley, who was a lieutenant, I think, leading a platoon, C Company, Charlie Company, in this particular offensive operation, which ended up in the village of My Lai, he was at the center of your story. But you found him when he was back in the United States in 1969, after this terrible event. How did you find him?
I wasn't told his name. I told there was something bad had happened. And I've gone nowhere. I looked and looked. The military, I was in the Army, and I understood in the Army, you can't hide anybody. There's always, it's a big combine, a big machine. And one day I'm walking, and I see a young officer I hadn't seen before. He was a colonel, and he was limping. And I'm just chasing a story. I didn't know, it was a month of not finding anything, but I was doing other things. I had a book contract, and I bumped into him, and he'd just come back. He was limping, and I knew him well because he was a very good guy when I had been at the Pentagon. This is 2 years later. I said, "What the hell are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I just got, I got shot in Vietnam." And he said, and he said, I just made general. And I said, "Oh my God, you took a bullet to make general." Black humor works. And I said, "What are you doing now?" He said, "Well, I work for the chief of the army, General Westmoreland." I thought, wow. And I said, so tell me about this massacre. And this very nice guy, thinking he's just telling me something incidental, says, oh, Hersh, you know, and he starts hitting his bad knee. He got shot in the knee. Nobody higher than that. This kid just murdered everybody. This Callie. And I said, Callie? And he said, yeah, he just shot everybody. There's no story there. And it's the perfect mesh. Here's an officer being responsible. And here's me saying, oh my God, he's just dropped a dime on me. And of course, I'm playing cool. I don't want anybody to know. From there, once I had the name, I found out there was a Callie who had been in the Army. I found a lawyer. I flew out to see the lawyer. He'd been a judge, a senior judge, and he was Callie's lawyer. He was a Mormon in Salt Lake City.
I'm so lonely, broken